Absolutely unbelievable. This court case started back in October of last year, so we've now entered 10 months of this trial. The jury was sent out by Justice Goss back on the afternoon of Monday, the 10th of July. This is day 22 of deliberations. They have had a total of 110 hours and 26 minutes of deliberations. That is absolutely incomprehensible in terms of what we usually see a jury taking. But of course, there are 22 charges on this indictment that the former nurse was facing. I know we've just been hearing some of the charges and the verdicts that the jury brought back, but I'll just summarise them. We now know that Lucy Letby has been found guilty of 7 murders. That's of child A, child C, child D, child E, child I, child O and child P. Of course, those names redacted for anonymity purposes. She's also been found guilty of 7 attempted murders of child B, 2 counts of attempting to murder child G, child F, child L, child M and child N. We also now know that she's been found not guilty of the attempted murder of child G and 1 count of attempting to murder child H. Then finally, there's those 6 counts that the jury were left hung on, and what that means is they were unable to come to a decision. That jury comprising of 7 women and 4 men. Of course, usually a jury consists of 12 people. A few weeks ago, the Justice Goss in this case, he released one of the jurors due to what he described as a good personal reason. We now have those, or now had those 11 jurors, should I say. They've just been discharged by Justice Goss after they came into the court to tell us that even given more time and the majority direction, they would be unable to come to any more majority verdicts. So those 6 counts were left hung. Now, one huge thing that we will take away from this court case is, with Lucy Letby being found guilty of those 7 murders, she now becomes the most prolific serial killer of children in modern British history. Just take that in for a moment. The most prolific serial killer of babies and children in modern UK history. That is what she will be known as. Of course, the sentencing is yet to come. We don't know yet what sentencing Justice Goss will pass. That's going to happen as of Monday of next week, the morning he told us, from 10 a.m. But of course, we can't talk about children murders without thinking about who Lucy Letby has taken over. That title was held by Rose West. She was charged with the murder of 5 children. But of course now, with those 7 murders she's been found guilty of by the jury here at Manchester Crown Court, that is now Lucy Letby. She becomes the most prolific serial killer of children in modern UK history. Now, let's talk a little bit about the reaction that Lucy Letby has had to these verdicts. Of course, initially she was highly emotional. As she was taken from the dock, we heard those sobs. But the next time when we heard, of course, these verdicts came in over several days. That first time there were sobs, but the second time we saw her, we heard effectively nothing. Her hands were over her face and there was no real reaction. Then over the past few days, we haven't seen the defendant at all. She refused to come up to the dock to see the families of those victims, to see her own parents, who of course have also been beside themselves as they've been hearing these verdicts coming in. Now, Lucy Letby herself, throughout this trial, I would say I of course have been here since October, coming and delivering reports on this trial. Since October, she has relatively been calm and collected throughout. Of course, there have been times where that facade has slipped and we've seen the emotion. There's been a couple of times, for example, when she was giving evidence, that we saw those tears, we saw the emotion there. There was also one instance where we had to stop proceedings for the day because she just became too emotional and she said it was all too much for her. So that facade has slipped at times, and of course we see that again now. We've been seeing verdicts. Initially there was the emotion, but then she was able to compose herself again and she just appeared as though nothing was happening whatsoever. And then of course she has refused to come up to the dock whatsoever. Of course we have to talk about the families in this case. The families who, of course, have been so devastated. 7 babies murdered by Lucy Letby. Of course, many of them have been present in Manchester Crown Court, not only during jury deliberations, but throughout the entire 10 months of this trial. They, of course, have been absolutely on the most emotional roller coaster one could ever imagine going on. We've seen tears, we've seen anger. One parent stormed from the room today after hearing that no more verdicts could be delivered. Of course, it is highly emotionally charged. But just to summarise all of this, of course, this is such a hugely complex case, and over the coming days, of course, I know shortly we'll be hearing a statement from the Crown Prosecution Service. There'll also be a statement from the Countess of Chester Hospital, of course, where all of these incidents took place between June of 2015 and June of 2016. They'll be putting out a statement later on today that we'll be bringing you. But just to summarise, we now know after 10 months that Lucy Letby, the former nurse, has been found guilty of multiple counts of murder, 7 counts of murder, 7 counts of attempted murder, and found not guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder.
Well, Sophie, this is the most extraordinary story, the most prolific child murderer in modern British history. There must now be questions asked of how this was allowed to take place 8 years ago, why it took so long for this individual to be brought to justice, and where the failings have been clearly taking place throughout the NHS, throughout perhaps social services, throughout the entire British state.
Absolutely, Tom, and this is something that has been discussed throughout the entirety of this trial. We don't know anything just yet, but one would imagine there will be investigations into the Countess of Chester Hospital and the wider NHS as to how something like this was allowed to happen. The number of incidents taking place over the span of a year. I mean, the first few murders, I believe, took place over just 2 weeks. And of course, colleagues of Lucy Letby's have given evidence throughout this trial. 4 of them have said that they believe that she was guilty and that they had always suspected that she was guilty of something. So it now becomes the question, what will happen? I'm sure the families will, especially those perhaps who haven't had a verdict, those 6 who were left as a hung jury, they will have questions as to what did happen then. Of course, the 2 that were not guilty is then what did happen to their children at the Countess of Chester Hospital all those years ago. Of course, this isn't a new story for the NHS. We can't really talk about baby murderers without talking about Beverly Allitt, who, of course, back in 1991, she was found guilty of the murder of 3 babies and 1 child. She became known in the media as the Angel of Death. Of course, Lucy Letby far surpasses the number of deaths she has been charged with now, but what Beverly Allitt was most known for was her choice, which was insulin poisoning, and that is what Lucy Letby has also been found guilty of. 2 counts of attempted murder via insulin poisoning. So this now becomes a much wider investigation, one would imagine, into exactly how this was allowed to happen, and as you say, exactly how it's been so many years before we've managed to come to this point today of finding Lucy Letby guilty of those crimes.
So